Hello, welcome to Parenting on Purpose, practical help for parents from parents. This is Discipline That Works, a lesson discussing how disciplining our kids is actually an act of worship, love, and flexibility. Let's start, number one, with worship. Discipline is primarily about worship. The way we discipline will reveal whether we worship ourselves, our kids, or God. When I discipline my child, I am worshiping my Father, mimicking His example. Think of Hebrews 12, 6 and 7. For the Lord disciplines the one He loves and chastises every son whom He receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? I think disciplining children is one of the most difficult acts of worship. We think we are correcting our kids, but God is so often doing a work in our hearts. He is revealing and transforming more in us than He is in our kids. Let me give you an example. When one of our kids was young, he would act up when we were in public because he knew other people were around and we could be distracted by things we needed to do and there might be fewer consequences. Think about what might be happening in our hearts as parents in that moment. We could ignore him because we have more important things to do. We could react in anger because we feel embarrassed. Or we could see this moment as an act of worship as we humble our hearts and tune in to what God is up to as we serve our neighbors and our child. Then, when we act, we don't simply react. We act out of a heart that is resting in God's grace through Jesus. So one time, when my wife was at a store, our eldest son was around 3 years old. He started running around the store, hiding in the racks of clothes and annoying people. Attempts to calm him down and keep him near were unsuccessful. Now, I want to emphasize that we can't always do this, and at times it actually would be wrong to do. But in that moment, my wife realized her plans needed to change. God was up to something really big, and there was nothing more important in that day than addressing the heart of our child. So she put him in the car, drove home, disciplined him calmly, firmly, prayed with him, went back to the store. This happened 3 times before our son began to realize that he was not in charge of the universe, that his 3-year-old agenda was not more important than everyone else's in the world. For parents, this time of training can be exhausting, annoying, and even infuriating. When your child is stubborn, it can actually feel hopeless. If you are driven by worrying about what other people think, or anger toward your child, or trying to be best friends with your child, you will give up. But if you parent as an act of worship, you will embrace this process as much for your own heart as your child's. Discipline is an act of worship. Second, disciplining our kids is an act of love. Now, several decades ago, our culture debated the issue of corporal punishment or spanking. Remember, spanking is just one aspect of discipline. And the elites in our culture concluded that parental spanking is equivalent to abuse and therefore is wrong. But what our culture doesn't understand, but the Bible does, is that every child will be spanked, even compliant ones. The question is when and where. The Bible recommends spanking a child early, at appropriate times, in an appropriate, loving, consistent parental context, rather than later in an unloving, unpredictable, destructive context. Listen to the way the Bible seeks to protect the future of our children. For example, Proverbs 13:24, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Or Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, that you may live long in the land. So undisciplined children will grow up and be spanked by addiction, law enforcement, prison, job loss, relational conflict, and ultimately divine judgment. The Bible calls us to love our child enough to spare them that future pain. Appropriate levels of restriction, loss of privilege, even pain now may save them inordinate amounts of loss and pain later. Now, of course, all children will experience hardship, but undisciplined children grow up to experience a disproportionate amount of self-inflicted pain. Parents who love their children discipline their children. And to be clear, discipline is different from abuse, which is unpredictable, humiliating, excessive, and motivated by anger. Discipline is different from manipulation. If you love mommy, you will stop screaming, and I will love you forever. That's manipulation. Discipline is different from fear. Stop that, or I'll take you out. Discipline is different from bribery. Pick up your toys, and I'll give you some candy. Discipline is different from guilt. Your whining is causing me to lose my mind. Biblical discipline is patient, consistent, moderate, and motivated by love. Third, finally, biblical discipline is flexible. Now, by flexible, I don't mean random. Arbitrary discipline is more like abuse, but consistent training is also flexible because our kids are all very different. As children mature, our discipline changes. For example, the wise parent responds differently to immaturity than he does to defiance. Parents of young teens no longer spank, but utilize appropriate means of discipline, like withholding privileges. When my kids were transitioning into middle school and high school, I spoke with them about their opportunity to obtain lots of responsibility, tons of freedom. As they walk in wisdom and their choices are motivated by the Spirit and the Word rather than peer pressure or foolishness, we will trust them and give them so much freedom they won't know what to do with it. But if they are not walking in wisdom, then we have the responsibility to provide a lot of oversight, and they will lose privileges and possibly end up resenting us. And this will not be fun for them or us. So let's walk through this together. And as our kids mature, our discipline morphs from something more like autocratic to something more like democratic. A parent of a 3-year-old should not negotiate with his stubborn child. It's actually quite pitiful to watch parents reason and plead with their toddler to do things a toddler is determined not to do and is actually not mature enough to fully grasp the reasoning yet. But it is also unhelpful to treat a teenager like a toddler. Our style of parenting should mature as our child does. The name of this lesson is Discipline That Works. Well, I need to be honest with you. It doesn't. It doesn't work if we mean like a formula to produce a mature, Jesus-loving kid. There is no such formula. But if we discipline as an act of worship, love, and maintain some flexibility, it will work in your own life as a parent, and by God's grace, overflow to your child as you live and give the life-transforming gospel of Jesus.